fans. Welcome to Unwarranted Music Opinions, a special episode. I'm June Lindberg here with Chaz Jenkins.
Hello.
And somehow we have managed to wrangle Andy Moor and Marion Coutts of Dog Faced Hermans to speak with a couple of music nerds from rural Eastern Kentucky. Thank you guys a lot for agreeing to do this. I was personally shocked and elated that you all were open to doing this. I didn't really ever expect this kind of thing to happen because we're just doing this podcast for fun, you know. We're just wanting to talk about music, so thank you all.
That's good. Mm-hmm. We're also doing the music for fun, so
that's what it's all about. But first things first, before we get into any kind of detailed discussion, I just like to start these things out with nowadays. How are you all holding up during all this madness and tumult in the world?
Marion?
I'm in London. Sorry, my child is scoobing around for something. Here, take that. That's what you want. I'm in London. We're fine. We're in South London. We're in Brixton. I live with my boy who's 13. It's been pretty grim and difficult, but in many ways it's been okay. I mean, it's just like getting through it. You know, it's what I mean is, you know, I have a house, I have somewhere to live, I'm surrounded by people I know, so it's not been too bad. But at the same time, it's been a long and continues to be a long haul, basically. Mm-hmm. And you know, UK is just in such a mess at the moment. I know that other countries also might be in a mess, but from where we sit, it's pretty chaotic and pretty unpleasant.
At the moment, I'm in Italy, which actually in the beginning of when the virus first started was one of the worst hit, but now seems to have kind of settled itself and they've kind of figured out how to deal with it, and they're dealing with it quite well, actually. I'm also from London originally, but I live in Amsterdam, and I have two boys, and we just stayed home for 3 months basically. But yeah, the way the Dutch handled it was pretty good, I thought, in general, compared to some of the other countries, particularly America and England. I thought was a disaster and a mess.
Yeah, we can't.
When I compare it to that, I think the Dutch did it pretty well, actually.
Yeah, we can't say confidently that things are going well over here. It's been quite a roller coaster for sure.
Yeah. I basically had about 4 months of gigs cancelled. So I lost I had all this stuff planned that and I still don't have any gigs at the moment. I mean, I have a couple coming up, but I fear they're also going to be cancelled. So the Dutch government gave me a bit of money to survive. They gave each family like 1,500 euros to live from, which was for us, luckily, was enough. But from September onwards, that stopped. So I don't really know what's going to happen from then.
Even the thought of such a scheme from our perspective looks just amazing.
Right, yeah, because we got
$1.
One installment of like
it was $1,200, I believe.
Yeah, of $1,200 US dollars.
It. Good luck.
Was that this check that was actually signed by Donald Trump?
Possibly.
You know, he was sending out checks where his name was on the check.
No idea.
I don't know about that, but it wouldn't surprise me necessarily.
Yeah, it's not out of the question.
So you got one sum of $1,200 to survive for the last 3-4 months.
Pretty much. And now they're arguing continuously about trying to do it again. It's crazy.
It isn't happening.
It's crazy. Well, enough sadness, and let's talk about some punk music.
Okay.
June, let's kick it off. I know you have a lot to ask about.
Well, first of all, Andy, you mentioned that you had some gigs that were lined up. What kind of music are you performing and playing nowadays?
Well, I still play with the X, but I wouldn't call that punk anymore. But I still play with the X, and all those gigs have stopped till next year. So those weren't the gigs that I was planning. I had some projects with sort of smaller combinations, a duo with a Lebanese French saxophone player and a duo with a French sound poet. And actually, I have planned a couple of gigs with Marion as a duo. That's in November, and we don't really know whether that's going to happen or not in Austria. At the moment, that's the only one. We were offered another one in the summer in Berlin, in a festival, a really nice festival in Berlin, which we had to cancel. So it's lots of sort of duos and trios, smaller, and also a solo project where I just play guitar and project images of photos that I have. But all that stuff I haven't done at all. So I've been painting shutters instead.
I saw them in the chat. They look lovely.
Like wonderful, wonderful shutters.
Oh yeah, of course you would see it as well. I didn't think of that. Yeah, I sent it to the group right now. Okay.
So to start things off with Dog Faced Hermans, instead of me describing what Dog Faced Hermans is, I guess I'll leave that up to you. How would you all describe the music that you all made?
Marion's waiting for me and I'm waiting for Marion.
Because it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild.
Well, what can I say? I think essentially you and Colin were the sort of ears at first. Is that making sense? The ears, Andy?
Yeah,
the ears.
yeah.
I turned up we all met in Edinburgh. I was a trumpet player from the church. Everyone in the church I grew up in, we played horns. It was that kind of place. So, and I don't know. I mean, it was a sort of, I was at art school. There was a sort of whole circuit of people you and Colin programmed. Andy and Colin programmed gigs at the art school. It grew out of the stuff that we were listening to at that point, which was in the sort of early 80s. Is that right?
Yeah.
From 82, 83, 84. I don't know. I what can I say? It was just, I mean, we always were the same. We came out of a group called Volunteer Slavery, which had 3 women and 3 men in, and that was a much more improvised unit. And I think the first, was that the one? The first gig we did was for a miners' benefit.
Yeah.
At Murray House Further Education College, and it was just, we wanted to do stuff together, and we were all friends. And I didn't know what I was doing at all, but I knew that I liked playing the trumpet, and I just felt there was sort of energy that was arising between us. And it really was, for me, it was a real musical education. I mean, previous to that, I was in a small Scottish town. I didn't really have much. I didn't grow up listening to music particularly, apart from lots of hymns. I mean, I didn't have a very sort of totally restricted upbringing, but I didn't come from a music background in a way. But things like choirs and hymns and that kind of choral sort of tradition, I suppose, was and tunes, the idea of writing tunes or making a tune was very much part of what I knew. But I don't know, was there, I mean, there wasn't really a sort of, it kind of grew out of what was happening at the time in a way, and the things that people were listening to, and the sort of also the kind of politics and the sort of the urgency of the time in Scotland in the early 80s. I think that's what it grew out of, really. Yeah,
for me it was, in a way, it's what Marion said about it was to do with what we were listening to. When I met Colin, I actually met him he was DJing at a benefit, and he was playing a bunch of records that I'd never heard before, and so I went up to him while he was DJing, which is really annoying for a DJ, I'm sure, and kept asking, well, what's that? And so at a certain point, I think we made a plan that I would go around to his house and just go through his records. So one day, I hardly knew him. I went to his house and I went through his record collection, and it was unbelievable. There was just so much stuff I'd never heard of it that looked amazing, just the record covers. And he just lent me about 60 records. He just said, here, take these home and listen to them, which was also amazing because he didn't know me at all. And I spent a whole summer listening to those records. And that was basically James Brown, Ornette Coleman, the Contortions, a lot of free jazz.
Yeah.
Also just a weird, and a lot of black music, and a lot of African music, and a lot of African American music. Just before that, I was listening more to new wave, like Talking Heads and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Because of that, for me, starting a band was just like a kind of also an extension of that. It was just like I thought I want to try and play music like this, not the same, because I knew that these were great musicians, great jazz, but I just thought I would like to do something with that spirit and energy, and I think it started a bit from that. So And then, like Marion said, it was a group of friends who had like-minded interests, and we were interested in kind of similar approach to music. But none of us knew what we were doing in the beginning at all. We went into a rehearsal room, which we could only rent at midnight, from midnight till 3 a.m, and just hit oil barrels and played horns. And none of us were playing the instruments that we ended up playing. Everybody was sort of changing, except Marion. Marion was playing trumpet and singing, but the rest of us were just trying stuff out. And I thought that was such a great way to start, and that it slowly kind of metamorphosized into something more structured.
But I remember almost for a whole summer with Kathy, who was the original saxophonist in Volunteer Slavery, the group that sort of preceded us, but just playing, learning to play Dollar Brand's African Marketplace. Do you remember? We're just thinking, we're just really trying to get this tune
again and again and again and again.
The whole summer. I'm sure it didn't, but it's a very, very beautiful tune. And just kind of getting under the skin of those kind of rhythms and those kind of melodies was just that's how you learn stuff, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because none of us came from a sort of studied music background. We didn't go to jazz school or classical school. Most kids at that age who started bands would tend to play more indie guitar bands, but we kind of chose for our starting point all this weird improvised jazz music and also African music. And I think because of that, that's why we probably sounded weird at the time, and people thought, what the hell is this? We also thought that. We also didn't really know what our sound was, but it was more like a celebration of the stuff we liked.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really good start.
So we've listened to, for the show, Hum of Life and Those Deep Buds. So your last 2 records for Dog Faced Hermans. And the thing that stuck out to me the most was the songwriting. There's a live performance. I can't remember exactly the venue, but you played Jan 9 there. And Andy, there's a clip of you whacking the guitar with what looks to be like a metal rod. And that's how you get that weird sound that in the guitar riff of Jan 9. So how did you decide the songwriting process and choosing the topics that you would write about? How did that all go about?
That song, for me, it was really partly related to the fact that I saw Sonic Youth in Glasgow in the early 80s. And it really, I just thought, you're allowed to do that to your guitar. Because the way they were putting drumsticks in and they were doing stuff to their guitar, and they weren't trying to smash them up at that time. Later on, it got a bit more when the whole Nirvana thing happened. They started smashing up their instruments, and I really didn't like that at all. What I liked about the early stuff is they were doing it to get an unusual sound, and then trying to, rather than just getting an unusual sound and making it a sort of experimental noise, they were trying to incorporate it into a song. And I was really interested in doing that. And that's all in Jan 9. It's just a slide tube in the string, a tin, the lid of a baked bean tin in the strings, and it was a barbecue skewer to make all that sound.
That's so awesome.
We did that with quite a few songs. It's just you don't see it, but that came also from seeing all this experiment, like Art Ensemble of Chicago and all these bands that were playing their instruments a bit differently. They weren't just Roland Kirk, for instance, who was playing 3 saxophones at the same time. And they weren't doing it only as a sort of gimmick. They were trying to do it and actually create great music and they did. It was sort of a combination. It wasn't just a circus act. And for me, that was the kind of source of it, I guess.
All the actual structures came out of just the rehearsal room. I mean, the lyrics are mine, but everything came out of just improvising in the room. So we must have done an awful lot of that, really.
Yeah, that's true. We improvised a lot in the rehearsal space and recorded it, listened to it, said, oh, that bit's good, oh, that bit's crap, and really basic, no real composition in advance. It was really the songs and then we would build the structure of the song around Marion's lyrics. And we were lucky because Marion had really great words, and it was kind of quite easy to build quite logical compositions around them. That was something that I realized later, how lucky we were to have that, actually, as a sort of structure, having the lyrics so well structured in the first place.
So speaking of the lyrics, Marion, and your vocal delivery, where did that come from? Where do the topics and ideas and the way that those ideas are expressed in the songs, what led you to write and perform in that way?
That's a really hard question. I mean, the songs were sort of around various nuggets of ideas, and the ideas were all different, but some of them would have just been, some of them are very, very speculative, like Jan 9 is a very speculative, kind of almost like future imagining. They're very short. I mean, they're kind of like these very sort of almost like crystalline units of text, I suppose. And I never, I didn't set out with a particular thematic at all. I mean, one of the things that happened quite early on is because we were quite loud. So the vocal delivery, frankly, sometimes was in order to be heard of the noise. And, there wasn't, I mean, for me, again, it's funny when you look back on stuff you've done ages ago and you kind of think, I've done it this way, or I could have, you have a sort of reimagining of your earlier work and you could really imagine doing it totally differently. But that isn't what we were doing then. We were at certain points, we became a 4-piece. We got quite proficient to a degree in doing the things that we wanted to do. So it could end up with the structures quite tight, and then we'd try and unpick them a bit and have areas where it all went a bit saggy and baggy, because it wasn't like we weren't sort of pursuing tightness for its own sake. Sometimes I don't know, the delivery, again, how much does one think about these things at the time? I'm not sure. I was always very much more interested in the live aspect of the group than I was in recording. It's just not, obviously we have done recordings, but it just wasn't, my fun wasn't there. So it was partly just what happens on the stage, how do people move around, what is it actually physically to hold a trumpet and be near a microphone, where do you need to position yourself? There was a lot of sort of gestural stuff, which and quite spatial stuff, which I think was just always something I was really involved in and really excited by. So yeah, that answers your question, but that sort of, again, because everything came out of the rehearsal room, and just, I don't know, some sort of, how do you communicate in a very noisy band situation? How do you actually get the stuff to sort of go through?
Yeah.
That was my interest.
So your last record was Those Deep Buds, which came out in 1994. Is there a reason you guys stopped releasing records? Was something happened in between the band, or did you guys feel that you just said all you needed to say with that particular project?
It was more that we kind of relocated to Amsterdam in, what was that, in 1990? So we started off in Scotland. I went off to Poland for a year because I'd got a scholarship to work in Wrocław. So I went off. But when I went off, we still had an idea that we hadn't finished, that we wanted to do stuff. So in that year, Andy had moved to Amsterdam, and Colin and Wilf. Colin was the bass player. Wilf Plum was the drummer. So everyone met up there. And it was all very, we just wanted to see what would happen. And actually, a lot did happen because you could very much easily sort of make a going for a group like us on mainland Europe than you could at that point on the island of Britain, in terms of getting places, in terms of getting gigs, in terms of networks. It was just about 250,000% more exciting in a way. Things
and easier, yeah.
And easier and kind of very sort of stimulating in certain ways. We kind of were living in Amsterdam, all four of us, which was, quite a big deal for people to relocate without particularly much to, stick onto. And then after, I was still, because I'm an artist, I'm a visual artist, I make visual work, and I was doing some exhibitions at that point. And I think in about 95, about 94, I kind of thought I wanted to move back to the UK. And so at that point we had a year of gigs booked. And so we decided we'd just do that year and then we would stop.
So what did you all enjoy about living and performing and operating out of Amsterdam? How was that?
A bit what Marion said is that there was a community of musicians and there was a lot more help. We were helped out a lot. Yeah. We were kind of embedded in the Amsterdam squat scene a bit. And there was a sort of autonomy where you just felt like stuff. When you tried to do things there, you could do it yourself. The people would help you, and they'd say, "Yeah, you can get a van, you can fix it yourself, you can." And of course, it didn't always work, but there was a lot of encouragement to get that kind of thing going. So that was a big eye opener for me, and I think it helped us a lot at that time. It was the idea of that your life consists of making music, traveling around the world, playing it to people, and they are enjoying it, and somehow we could make a living from it.
It was amazing.
It was very special.
We did that for
remarkable.
Yeah, we couldn't have done that. We couldn't have done much as I have a huge fondness for Scotland. We couldn't have done that from that base.
Yeah, and we were lucky. We got to come to the States also 2 or 3 times, which I never imagined we would have been able to. But somehow our music actually appealed to the American ear. Maybe because actually a lot of influences of our music also came from American music, not only, but quite a lot. So that was also an incredible adventure. And we did all these things on sort of the smallest budget. We traveled in a van, sometimes even cooked. Instead of going to a restaurant, we had a little cooker, and we would have beans and rice for dinner instead of going to the local.
Beans and rice. We had spicy beans.
Spicy beans and rice, yeah.
And jalapenos, and we had fritters, and we were really into cooking.
Yeah, and the American audience was also really generous and great. They gave us a lot back for what we were giving them. They gave us a lot back in return, which we really appreciated.
You mentioned that the European and the circuit there was super, super exciting. Can you go into a little more detail about that? How was that experience?
There's a network of bands and musicians and organizers at that time more, but there still is, and it's just a different manifestation now. But I was amazed. We played in Hungary and there was a whole scene of people there that knew our music. And this is before computers or internet, like it's pre-internet. So people were searching, and they would put our music out on bootlegged cassettes and stuff, which was totally fine for us. And I found that really exciting that you could go to these places and we would receive letters from somebody in Greece or in Romania. So there was a sort of it was just a healthy scene of like-minded musicians and artists and organizers.
But it was also quite an international scene, like lots of American and European musicians, absolutely for the same reasons that we went there, gravitate towards Amsterdam because they can make things work, because they can get paid for their music, they can plug into a network, which is, again, for them quite exciting, and they can sort of base themselves there. I mean, that. I don't know if that's still the same now, but it was really very, very much so when, in the early 90s.
It is different now. Now, then we never ever paid for our rehearsal spaces, as far as I remember. We kind of built them ourselves in spaces within spaces in squats of friends that we had. We would have to do the work to build a new rehearsal space when a squat was evicted or something. And so we ended up not having to spend money there was a lot of expenses that we were spared because of that. And that really helped us also. That's different now. Amsterdam's changed a lot. It's become a very expensive city. And bands, now you go to rock school and you learn how to curate at rock school, or you learn how to professionally run a band. It's a very different situation now.
Don't go to rock school, Andy. It's too late.
No,
it's too late.
I won't go, and I won't teach rock school.
Don't teach. If anyone offers you to teach rock school, just say no, okay?
Going to a school to learn how to curate to run a club, I find that such a bizarre concept, because the places we were playing, the people who organized it, the promoters, they were like fans of music, and we were part of their roster of bands that they liked, and they developed their own taste, and they were inviting those, making a balance of people that they could draw a crowd. But it really was their own personal taste that they developed themselves, and now you can study it, which I find. And I meet promoters where I feel that I think, you've studied curating at a rock school, haven't you? I can really. They haven't got a clue. Like, they don't know where we've come from. They don't know the history really of They're kind of just taking a bit of reggae, a bit of jazz, a bit of punk, it's more like sort of genre and making a sort of program like that. But it's a very different approach, which I'm not so keen on.
When we're in the States, you just coming into contact with college radio, that again was a network for us that was very, very effective.
Oh, yeah, that was amazing.
No experience of at all. And we go from one tiny little place to another tiny little place, and there'd be a whole bunch of people in a room going, oh yeah, we heard this, and that just was like a complete revelation for us. I mean, those networks did not exist in the UK at that point.
So one of my questions was originally going to be, do you miss performing music or making music? But it seems to be from the case, because Andy, you're still performing, and you and Marion, we're going to have a concert hopefully in this November. Hope that still goes on. So I guess my question now is, do you miss performing Dog Faced Hermans? And was there ever a desire to perform with the band again, perform those songs again?
Not really.
No. I think it was completely brilliant. It was a total privilege, and kind of looking back on it, you just think, how could we have been able to do that? I mean, really, nobody had much. There was no sort of ballot, or what do you call it? It was just quite risky, and it was quite exciting in that way, in its riskiness. But no, I think it was for me, really wonderful things and really exciting things. But playing in Iceland, doing a tour of Iceland was absolutely phenomenal. We went to Switzerland quite a lot. And it's like each country would have a kind of different sort of scene that it would be quite interesting to explore and see, what did those people make of this, and sometimes it was not it was in English language music, and sometimes we were in countries where the English wasn't the first language. So how does that kind of translate, So that was all just really exciting. I don't think I think we did the things that we wanted to do as a 4-piece. And like I say, we had that year of doing, really kind of planning in the things we wanted to do before we stopped. And our last gig was it San Francisco? I think it was in San Francisco. Yeah. Was our last gig. So that was, we were working towards an end point in a way. Mm. And yeah, I don't think that, it's part of our sort of collective history, but we don't need to sort of bring it up and re-examine it in a sense. I mean, I do find me and you, Andy, we've done literally one concert recently. That was at Cafe last November. And that was the first. That was, I had to get...
Well, we're not doing Dog Faced Hermans songs.
We're not doing Dog Faced Hermans stuff. But these are completely new. And I think it's much more exciting to sort of work out what do you want to say now, rather than say these songs which come from a particular place and have a particular sort of heft to them, or particular, they're speaking to certain things. So yeah, that was then really.
I feel like my musical history has always been like that. I don't play old songs. Also in the X, sometimes we get asked to play State of Shock, which is like nearly 30 years old. And we just say, no, we don't want to do that anymore. We want to do new things. And probably in a way, that's sometimes the audience feels like they're a bit behind, because we make the songs, we put a record out, and by the time we've toured quite a bit, we want to already play new material. So we're not kind of playing the old hits. Not that we have hits, but you know what I mean.
Right.
And that was the same with Dog Faced Hermans. We were continuously, every year making a new set, or every year and a half, so that by the time people knew the songs we were already making, and we were touring again, they were hearing new stuff. So they were always one record behind us. But for me, that's much more interesting also. It also meant the audience had to work quite a bit. They weren't just getting the songs that they knew. So that also makes sense then, that we don't feel like suddenly going back and making a greatest hits tour. That would just be, that would just be pointless. The only reason in the world you would do that is if you were offered like millions of euros, and then you would be an idiot to do it, because it would just feel a bit mercenary to be doing it for money. It doesn't make any sense.
So Marion, you mentioned that you had new things to say nowadays. What are some of the things that you want to talk about and want to express?
What are those things? Where are they? Let me look for them on my computer. I don't know. Like, what? I was really surprised and happy when last November, when we decided to work together again. And we just, we had about a very short rehearsal time. So most of it was me sending some lyrics to Andy, him coming back with stuff. It was very sort of done by email, essentially. I don't know. I mean, I haven't, again, I can't give you a lyric. I've only just recovered the Cafe Otto tapes on my computer. I found them, Andy, by the way.
Yay!
I think, I suppose I've been doing quite a lot of writing in the last years, quite different kind of writing. And I'm quite interested in, I mean, I've more, essentially the work I was making as an artist was more I was making videos and objects. And I suppose in the last 3 years or perhaps more, sort of writing and text is playing more of a part in my work. In 2018, I went to this island called Fogo Island, which is just off Newfoundland. And it was a thing called the Islands Arts Writing Residency. And it was a really wonderful opportunity. And I sort of, again, quite speculative. I pitched for it in a very speculative way. I thought, I don't know if they'll want me, but they did, and that's good. And I came up with some very short, again, quite kind of almost like hammered out texts. I mean, they're not bits of poetry really, but they're sort of chunks of text in a way. And they will come out, well, heaven knows what happens now with COVID, but the idea was they will come out as a very small publication with a whole load of photographs connected called Pluton, and that will come out with Art Metropole, who are based in Toronto at some point. I don't know when that's going to happen. So I suppose I've been doing these short, quite concise texts a bit more. So it's like getting into the sort of habit of it, or trying to work out what I want to do with that short format, I suppose, which doesn't really answer your question, but I don't really have an answer really to talk to. It's more like there's a kind of form, I suppose, I like to work in. And I'm sort of was interested last November when we did this Otto thing of seeing how that form would work in this context, i.e. as a part of a duo. Because for sure there's songs, but they're also kind of, I don't know, some kind of object status about them. There's the stat aspect, and then there's the actual formal object aspect of the text.
Do you see them as poems?
What?
Do you see them as poem? Do you see them as poems?
No.
Sorry, I'm asking questions now as well. Is that okay?
That is entirely fine. Less work for me.
Do you see them as poems, Marion?
Yeah, you've asked that 4 times, and I've said no 4 times. They are not.
Okay, you don't see them. Okay, right. But, and also not as songs either.
Oh, really? I suppose some of them are a bit song-like. Yeah. I don't know. I just kind of think you learn stuff by moving between different types of contexts for language, I suppose, don't you?
I mean, for me, the new texts that Marion sent me, I see quite a connection between those and the words that she used to write for her songs, partly because they were short. They felt to me more like sort of short poems, or more like just thoughts that were in her head that she wanted to kind of compress into a sort of very small, digestible form. But they were also connected with images. And one of the ideas we'd had was to actually show those images while we were performing, but we didn't have the time to really set that up. But that's what I really liked about them. And also her writing in general, I find really amazing still, and sort of always inspires me to make sound and make music with it. I mean, not her longer, not like her books, but the shorter pieces that I've seen.
But they are quite sort of overtly visual. They kind of often talk about their kind of use visual language. You can sort of conceive of them in your head in a way as listening to them.
Has the songwriting process changed since the Dog Faced Hermans era? Because you mentioned like it was a lot of improvisation and seeing what worked, what didn't work. Has that process changed?
You mean for us too?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's going to be very different because we weren't even in the same room. I mean, the thing with Dog Faced Hermans is we would go into the rehearsal space with a giant question mark over our head and say, what are we going to do? And just start from scratch. There were small ideas thrown around, but there was no concept. And here we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it by passing files to each other and listen. And then I listen, and then I think of an idea, which comes also as an improvisation, and we go back and forth. And then when we met, we actually rehearsed in Marion's living room with no kind of volume or anything. And it was more to do with making very basic arrangements. And again, there was improvisation in it. That's how I've been playing for the last 30 years anyway. I do a lot of improvisation, completely free improvisation. But what I like to do is do it within a kind of form, within a structure. And with Marion, that seemed very possible. But we also have backing track that we play along with on some pieces. So we're kind of caught in that frame. It's quite loose, though. It has a sort of fresh looseness to it. But it's very different from how we did it with the band, of course, yeah. Which it should be.
Much quieter.
There's more space also,
Much more space. Yeah.
So Marion doesn't have to scream.
Not in a rush.
So I have a fairly open-ended, maybe somewhat difficult, just throwing it out there kind of question. But lyrically speaking, on the two Dog Faced Hermans albums that we discussed fairly in depth on the show, some of that discussion was around the topics, which a lot of the time, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Marion, just seemed at the least very peeved and at most just very angry about certain things, certain ideas that are flowing around the world that you take a look at and you think, this is just ridiculous.
Of all the words you could have used, I think peeved is fantastic.
It's a great word to use.
It's a great word. Yeah.
Do you think that the world has gotten better in regards to what you've talked about? I know that that's a insanely difficult question, but are you still as fired up about certain things?
I mean, really, that is not a difficult question at all. I mean, let's face it, this is 2020. Do we think the world has got better? Really, I don't think. I don't think I need to say anything at that point. No, we're in a very desperate situation. And in a way, we've fallen off whatever sort of idea of a plateau we were on, of holding it together. I mean, we don't seem to be holding it together at all. I don't know. I don't have sort of targets particularly. It's quite hard for me to sort of think about a lyric and to say, I mean, obviously some things are very much about certain issues which were going on or about certain things that we were experiencing. Just thinking about some of the stuff which is on Hum of Life. There's a particular song which arises directly out of a news story about some a sort of Dutch immigration raid, So I was living in Holland. I was living without much money. Obviously, I'm a white person. They weren't going to raid me. Do you know what I mean? These things were very much the sort of arena in which we lived. And I think if you're going to open your mouth about anything, you try to reflect and reframe or rethink some of the things which are going on around you, really. So that was kind of what I wanted to do. And sometimes it came through reading, sometimes it came through reading. There was a piece, I think it's on, what's the other one called? Those Deep Buds. There's a kind of piece which is completely a lift from Angela Carter, for example, because great piece of text. It's like I completely, when you read something, you think, the resonance of that and the sort of articulacy of that. I mean, I didn't lift very many things, but that was sort of one of them. So again, sort of thing that you're sort of just reflect what you're reading and thinking about at the time and the people you're connected to at the time and the people you think are, working with the language in really interesting ways or, and that's just, so it's a kind of reflection of that really.
Andy, I know you mentioned that the way that sometimes these songs would come together would be based around the lyrics that you would receive. How did you ever, hear a lyric and think, okay, well, this song has to sound like this song has to sound like that? And how did that reflect in the way that you played your guitar? Because I think sometimes when I listen to Dog Faced Hermans, this is something that I really like about the music in your guitar playing on it. It's noisy, it's abrasive, it's sometimes dissonant, but there's also always some like line or just something that keeps you kind of grounded and hooked throughout.
I never ever ever thought this song should sound like. I've never ever thought that when I was making music with the Dog Faced Hermans or with the X, that this song should sound like this, because I'm playing with 3 other musicians and I never tell them what to do. I wait to see what they do and we kind of negotiate. Sometimes if someone doesn't like something, but nobody really had, that's what I said, we always walked in the rehearsal space with a question mark over our head. Nobody really had an idea of how we should sound. We had a very strong idea about how each of our instruments sounded and how they sounded together and how they worked together. And when we made music, which always started off just playing for hours sometimes without lyrics at all, just playing, and slowly finding something that worked, that we thought had a kind of glue, and that where the sum was greater than the part, whatever that is, the parts were greater than the sum of the whole of the parts. So I've never had a concept about how my music should sound. For me, it's always been a kind of, it's partly reactive, but it's really trusting my ears and listening and constantly adjusting to the other musicians and to my own sound, and trusting also that the things that I like and that I choose to keep and repeat and play again are good. And the thing about the grounded, catchy things that are always there in the noise, I think that was really, all 4 of us had that. All of us had, Colin played amazing catchy bass lines. Like normally a bass player plays sort of supportive notes under chords, but Colin always came up with these great sort of, that were like little tunes in themselves. And Marion, she didn't play this kind of jazz solo trumpet style. She always played kind of melodies, and we were always more interested in playing little riffs and things. So I think that's where the combination of those 3, we never had someone that was really a soloist or who was playing I never was into playing guitar solos. And I think that gave it its character also. And that's where I always thought, when young bands start, the best thing they can do is just, not try to sound like anybody else or play or learn how to play solos, just to try and make up your own ideas, your own simple melodies, and keep it simple. If you have 3 people playing something simple, it can end up sounding very beautifully complex. But in itself, each of our parts is quite simple. And that actually also comes from a lot of African music, which rhythmically, each musician is playing quite a simple part, but when they put it together, and you put it together in a way, then nobody else in the world can play it the same as we do, because it's our own style and our own character. And for me, that was the strong aspect of the band, that nobody was trying to sound like, we weren't even trying to sound like Dog Faced Hermans. We didn't say, oh, that's not a Dog Faced Hermans. So we were just trying to make music, and we made a lot of music we didn't like as well, and you'll never hear it. Luckily, we threw it away.
Nice.
We also made
there was quite a lot of folk also. There was kind of certain sort of folk actual song structures and lyrical structures and things that would come in that it's not a lift from something. So not being afraid to really pull the sort of maneuver whatever the piece of music is, you call it a song, it's 3 minutes long, whatever, not being afraid to kind of maneuver the thing around midway, because that was, the exciting thing. And it was like listening to the rehearsal tapes, and then at a certain point you think, oh, that's a bit where the chords are doing something funny, or there's a kind of something's happening, resonating within the room. That's the exciting. You'd have to kind of actually do a lot of listening back. I mean, in a way, it's quite a painstaking process now I think about it. You'd have to do a lot of listening back to remember what you did, because nobody was writing it down beforehand. So having to sort of get back to what you did and think, that sort of slightly buzzy bit where the whole thing seems to go up a step or move right a step. Again, I think of it all as very spatial and very kind of physical. What happens in a room when chords are going dissonating or whatever, together. And then you think, there's a strange thing on which one can put a voice, so there's a sort of platform for a bit. So, it was all very, it's like kind of these things are building blocks, but you have to, in order to work out what you've done, you have to listen and then see how you can reshape them or how you can take them forward into something which approximates a song, in inverted commas.
What Marion said about folk music, like, this song you mentioned earlier, Jan 9. The end of it, suddenly we decided to go off into a Romanian gypsy tune. And I have no idea, when I listened to it, because I listened to the record today because I knew you were going to ask about that record, and I hadn't heard it for a while. And when I heard that, I thought, how the hell, why did we do that? And how and why? Because we had this great riff going, and then suddenly there's a viola playing, and suddenly we go off into this kind of Romanian gypsy tune. And my only explanation could be that we were listening to that music at the time, and we thought, we probably had some kind of reason, but for me, it's always a celebration. We just thought, this is great music, and somehow we found a way to, it's a kind of sampling in a way, because it's not our melody. It's a really old traditional melody, but it felt completely fine to do that. And I think that was great in the band, that everyone had these little tunes. And we also did a version of Bella Ciao, the Italian partisan song. There's loads of little references to other music from Peace Warriors by Ornette Coleman. And they were kind of covers, but they also weren't covers. They were just sort of pointing in that direction and saying, we love this and we want to do it and see what happens or something. I found that really adventurous. They never felt like cover versions to me, which was a very good experience.
My last question, what the heck's a Dog Faced Herman?
Oh my God. You have to ask Wilf.
It was Wilf. Wilf came up with a name.
It's from a Frankenstein movie, I think. It's a woman who has a dream that her husband, who is called Herman, turned into a dog. And she woke up and said, I'm dreaming of Dog Faced Hermans. And
that explains it.
There you go.
It's something like that. Something like that.
My final question for you two, you can answer this however you personally feel about it. I find that for a lot of bands, the recording process is different for every different band. How was the recording process for your studio albums? The packaging, like picking your album covers, the titles, the actual recording process. How was that personally for you two?
Well, I think the covers and the album covers, I was really happy because Marion's a visual artist, and I thought that was her department, and she always did an amazing job. Like, we never thought, what did you choose that for? Like, it was really easy for me. It might have been hard for her, but it was really easy for me. They always look great. And when I look at them now, they still look amazing. They don't look like
they're nice. I like the books. I like we put a lot of work into all these books. I mean, just, this is all this is all scissors and tape, this is all just very basic stuff, but really exciting. I mean, that was the sort of, again, that was the environment we came out of. I mean, I think you probably enjoyed the actual recording more than me, Andy. I just was very much, I mean, obviously, it's just not as much my thing as going around and appearing for 45 minutes on a stage. I did it, and but yeah, it wasn't intellectually, I think that wasn't where I was most excited.
I think in retrospect, when I look back at our recording experiences, we didn't have money to go into really good studios. And so it was tough to hear back the quality sometimes of, Wilf would hit the snare and they'd record it. And I just thought, fuck, it just doesn't sound like a snare. And that took a long time because we were recording in quite low budget studios, not always, but most of the time. Oh. We had to work quite hard to try and get it to sound good and to try to get it to sound like us. And we didn't have a producer. We were doing it ourselves. We had the recording engineer and us. Maybe we should have had a producer. I think in retrospect, it might have been good to have someone that knew and our last record that we did with Guy Fixon, Those Deep Buds, for me, that sounds fantastic. And it's because we had someone that really knew and he actually said to us, I love your music, but I haven't heard one record that actually the way he said it was, does you justice, that actually sounds as good as you sound. So I think we always compromised a bit. Also, recently when we were reissuing all this stuff for LP, me and Colin went through the songs and because we had to remaster them, and we were just thinking, what the hell did we do? Like, sometimes Marion's vocals are swamped in reverb, and I thought, why did we do that? And
sounds like
you can't hear the bass drum, and there was so much. We thought, what were we thinking? And it was really to do with inexperience and our age. Yeah. So, and of course that has a charm now. When you listen back to it, you think, but there were other bands, guitar bands, similar lineup to us that were recording in better studios at the time. And I can hear sometimes their records sound great. Sonic Youth and the Pixies, I think our music was better. But I think I think they had good sound. They managed to have really good recordings. So yeah, it was a constant learning experience. I did enjoy being in the studio. I found it really kind of exciting also.
Well, if it makes you guys feel any better, especially on the 2 records we heard, and personally for me on Those Deep Buds, your guys' playing is tight and super fantastic and consistent. It sounds like you guys have been performing for years and years, like a jam band. Like, it really doesn't come off that there's that sense of young amateurish nature to it. It sounded super professional. So,
well, that's also because we recorded after we toured. We didn't record the record and then go on tour and promote it. That's why the audience was always one record behind always. We would tour first a lot to learn how to play the songs, because we would make them in the practice room, and we would make these songs that we had the idea, but we didn't actually know how to play them. And by playing live, we learned to play them, and then we would reach a point where we thought, okay, this is ready to be recorded. So by the time we went in the studio, we could actually play the songs quite well. And actually, usually after we did the recording, we would start making new material.
Yeah.
For me, it seemed like the most natural way to do it. It seemed crazy to record first and then go on tour. That didn't make sense to me because we couldn't play the songs yet.
Is there anything that before we started this interview that you were thinking, oh, I'm going to talk about this, that we didn't cover today that you would like to talk about?
I wanted to ask Marion something actually about why she chose the date January 9th for that song. Because somebody asked me the other day about it and I couldn't answer.
You know,
sorry, Marion.
Andy, you know the word 9?
Yeah.
It rhymes with time.
But it could have been June 9. It could have been June 9.
Well, Jan is the opening of the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
It is.
Okay.
Again, I was also doing some research because I do confess I have not listened to this record for a little bit of time. And I came to a site where they put all the lyrics on the site, right? And of course, they put them all on slightly wrongly, okay?
Of course.
The last line, or the last little chunk goes, we decided that the resources are after all finite, okay? So on this site, which I can't remember the name of and perhaps best remain nameless, it says, we decided that the resources are after all fortnight. So
it is Fortnite, yeah.
Brilliant.
About what they're doing, I have to say. Fortnite. So just goes to show, do not, kids, any listeners to this radio station, do not believe what you read on the internet.
Resources are finite, Marion, yes. Because you also say it about 8 times, so I'm not surprised that they didn't get that one.
Yeah, right. You think after hearing it 8 times, you might realise it wasn't fortnight. But yeah, be careful, everybody. Be careful.
Well, with those final words of wisdom about the dangers of online lyric sites.
Yes. Check your facts, kids. Check your facts.
Absolutely.
Especially now.
That will go ahead and conclude our interview unless there's anything else that you all want to talk about, because it's just wide open for you all right now.
No,
I think we're happy, really. I think it's time to get my kid out of the house and go out. That's what I think.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Very nice to speak to you both.
Yes,
yeah.
Marion, I'll stop emailing you now. We can.
That's okay. No, it's good. Perseverance is good. Some people just give up, you see, and it's good that you didn't give up. Otherwise, nothing would have happened. So.
And where can we hear this interview?
I will be posting it. It'll be a while before it gets down the line because we're swamped with back catalog of episodes to get caught up. But once I get it edited and ready, it'll be up on YouTube, and I will of course send a link to Marion.
Thank you very much. All right.
Okay. Great. Thanks
Goodbye,
a lot,
everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Talk to you.
Bye.
Bye.